Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. We've got Kris Goldsmith back, Task Force Butler CEO and a bona fide Nazi hunter. Kris, in your text to me as we set up the show, you wrote, there's a direct line between January 6th and the Vegas bombing. Why don't we jump right into it? Tell me what you're seeing between the insurrectionist movement that we are marking this week and this new surge of terrorist activity.
Yeah. So what I think is sad is that a lot of people, journalists, well-meaning journalists, have looked at what happened in Vegas and they're starting to go, oh, this is a veteran with PTSD. It wasn't terrorism. Just because the guy wrote in his crazy manifesto that this is not terrorism. Like, I don't know when else that has ever worked. Now, what I think it's important for people to actually read this. I, as an extremism researcher, I often get extremely frustrated when people share manifestos by crazed individuals who go out and murder others. But the reason that I want to encourage people to seek this one out, and to be clear, I'm talking about the one distributed by police, not by conspiracy theorists on YouTube, is because this guy is talking about a bunch of QAnon themes. He's talking about truckers and veterans going to DC and surrounding federal buildings and shutting down highways and engaging in a purge. He's talking about a hard reset. A hard reset is a term used by accelerationists, like white supremacists who are trying to collapse our government and society so that they can engage in a race war. So the connection between January 6th and what happened in Vegas is this MAGA extremism. This guy is a MAGA extremist. His call to action at the end was for everyone to rally around Trump, Elon Musk, and RFK Jr., the three of the most important and influential spreaders of political disinformation in the United States.
The second part of that, it's not terrorism assertion, was this is a wake-up call, right? That's what he wrote. He's like, it's time to wake up. I mean, if that's not alarming, I don't know what it is, but it's a direct appeal to the conspiracy mindset and this idea that he knows something the rest of us don't, and that he's part of this small cabal of those who see the world for what it really is. The other part that really alarms me is something we touch on in the film Against All Enemies. I mean, we did a whole documentary about this, which is that this kind of extremism isn't limited to the outer fringes, the disaffected vet who never saw combat, who was sort of a tier 3 rear echelon soldier who never got the thrill of combat. This was a decorated Green Beret, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And when you're bringing that kind of people into the extremist movement, watch out.
Yeah, this guy was, someone who I'm sure considered himself an operator, right? He came from the operator community. And what makes this event so significant is, again, his call to action. If he had been a jihadist and he had made this call to action for a jihad, which is basically what he's talking about, like a purging of what he considers infidels of the United States, I think that the press would be, frankly, a lot more concerned. And they should be. They should be extremely concerned, because like I've said 1,000 times, and like I said in Against All Enemies, the documentary, that veterans, the reason why we are targeted by extremist organizations is because we're economically efficient targets. If you can change the mind or the ideology or the voting behavior or the set of values and moral codes of a veteran, you're likely to take that veteran's family and that veteran's social network, his immediate friends, family, people that he or she works with, right? And veterans are more likely to be listened to. It's why you have a show, and it's why I'm a frequent guest on all these shows, right? Because we served, because people want to hear from veterans. And when we make these types of calls for action, people are more likely to listen to us. And unfortunately, one of our brothers in arms was so warped by disinformation, and yes, probably traumatic brain injury and PTSD too. But it was the disinformation that pushed him to make a call to action that people are unfortunately going to listen to.
We need to emphasize that, because this assumption that, I guess, one, all veterans have PTSD. Two, if you do have PTSD, you're somehow broken and violence prone. And three, that PTSD is an affliction that affects veterans only. I mean, 98% of people with PTSD in this country never served in the military, right? And aren't prone to violence. So I really appreciate that you are connecting it to the disinformation. That's what broke this guy, not his service. Well, I mean, there's a chain of events, but it's the disinformation. And it's striking to me that in the days after we have an incident like this, Mark Zuckerberg makes an announcement that he is changing his disinformation policy. He's moving his moderation team from California, where apparently they're biased, to Texas, where they won't be. And he's reinserting politics into the meta universe in the wake of Trump's election. I don't think any of that's going to help.
Yeah, these things are directly related. I mean, the reason that I got into studying and combating extremism is because I started off studying disinformation and misinformation and how it was affecting the military and veterans community. This whole career arc started because I found a fake version of my employer at the time, Vietnam Veterans America, a congressionally chartered veteran service organization. The Russians had created an entire internet suite, several websites, a Facebook page with 500,000 followers. And I fought for years against Facebook to get them to shut down that page. And their response to me, until I got the attention of Congress and the press and therefore the people, was that, oh, well, they're not violating our community standards. They're not violating our rules, so we don't have to take it down. It wasn't until I embarrassed them that they took it down. And it drives me crazy that here we are, 6 years after I published the Troll Report on all of the ways that these foreign entities were doing damage to our community, that Mark Zuckerberg is going back to square one and saying that we're not going to have humans involved. We're not going to have reputable fact checkers involved in making sure that the information space is filled with good, nutritious for your mind information. Instead, it's going to be filled with AI slop, and it's going to be filled with disinformation that is politically advantageous to Donald Trump and his fascist regime.
As a person who exists publicly, especially as someone who shares my opinions online, I am hyper aware of safety and security. And unfortunately, it is easier than ever to find personal information about people online. All this data hanging out on the internet can have actual consequences in the real world. The fact is, you can't always control whether you are a target, but you can make it harder for politically motivated actors to escalate threats by taking a proactive approach to the security of your personal information. That is why I personally recommend Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal info from hundreds of data brokers. Delete Me sends you regular personalized privacy reports showing what info they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. Delete Me is always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. To put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping your and your family's personal information from data broker websites. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting Ken to 64000. Text Ken to 64000. That's KEN to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to let you know that we'd love to hear from you. Your comments, suggestions, thoughts about future topics and guests. Email us at info@thekenharbaughshow.com and make sure to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and back to the show. Well, it's pretty obvious that we're not going to be able to count on regulation, on government, on the voice of the people to rein this kind of thing in. If we couldn't count on it over the last 4 years or the last 12 years, we're certainly not going to be able to count on it in the second Trump administration. What can the rest of us do then if our will isn't being represented by the government to do something about this? What can we do as private citizens or as civil society actors with our various advocacy groups to try to address the kind of poison that turned this Green Beret into a terrorist?
So that word poison that you used is actually perfect. I went to college late. I joined the Army, served in Iraq, had a rough transition home. I don't think I went to college until I was 28 years old. One of the most eye-opening concepts that I ever came across in school was in Economics 101, where I was introduced to the idea of negative externalities. The way I still remember the professor and his analogy, his story, talking about, you've got your house and next door is a coal plant. You're a power plant that burns coal. You're buying electric. You need them, right? They're providing a necessary service. You're not going to live in the Stone Age, but they're producing toxic smoke, and it's coming and it's coating your house, it's coating the inside of your lungs, giving you and your kids cancer. How do we incentivize them to correct that behavior? We tax them, because they're producing a negative externality on us. They're costing us our health, our well-being, right? That is what Mark Zuckerberg is doing. He has for a while had caps on the smokestacks outside his coal plant. And now he's saying, you know what? No regulation. I'm ripping those caps off, and I'm going to start pumping out even more poison into your environment. Doesn't matter if you're a Facebook user or not. You could be the person in the Stone Age across the street from the electric plant saying, I'm not going to use electric, but that electric plant is still affecting your environment, right? So we, the rest of us, need to start talking about disinformation as pollution. It is pollution that someone is always responsible for. Someone is always producing it. Someone is always allowing it to end up in your environment. And that is Mark Zuckerberg. So if we spend the next 4 years talking about how our earth and our information space are being polluted because of deregulation in the Trump administration, the next Democratic administration that we will have is going to start looking at all of this pollution and using economic incentives to clean it up. And that is going to come in the form of taxes and penalties. And I look forward to the day that Meta, X, and the rest of these social media companies, Google, YouTube, right, are held responsible for the pollution that they have spread across our world over the last 20 years. Because that's what is happening to oil and gas producers, right, who poison the land. They are being held accountable. It may not be enough, but it is enough to adjust their behavior. And that is where we have hope. We start building this movement, talking about disinformation as pollution, so that our politicians treat it like pollution and start penalizing and taxing these companies to make sure that they are incentivized to clean it up.
Well, it brings to mind the multi-$100 billion tobacco settlement. And I would venture that the damage done by disinformation is even greater than that done by cigarettes over decades and decades. We definitely need a radical rethinking of how we treat social media companies and the purveyors of disinformation. And I like your approach to setting the stage for real change with the next administration, but that means we got to get through the next 4 years. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about this between now and then. Kris, thanks very much. Do you want to give us any updates on Task Force Butler and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so a new year. Task Force Butler is partnering with Common Defense. It's the largest grassroots veterans organization in the country, and we are going to be working on research and accountability for domestic extremists. With the Trump administration coming in, the job is going to be huge. We're going to have a lot of work to do, and we're going to be specifically looking at the intersection of like the brown shirts, the black shirts, right? The thugs, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, who are going to have a relationship with the Trump administration. And we are not living in a failed state. We are still a nation of laws. The states are especially in blue states, are still run by other levels of government that the Trump administration will not be able to completely interfere in. We are going to be working to hold people legally accountable when they engage in violent and destructive fascism.
We'll put a link, as always, in the show notes. Thanks, Kris, for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.